From your explorations of Fine Steed Hamlet and Mercyheart Monastery, you have learned that Tian Ying and Master Miaoshan are one and the same, and that he has recently returned to Qinghe. Yet several pieces remain missing. You choose to linger a while longer before setting off into the Jianghu so that you may weave these scattered truths into a single thread. As you reflect on Sifadrian's experiences with the Datura poison at Mercyheart Monastery, your thoughts drift back to a series of unsettling scenes you glimpsed in nearby Mercyheart Town and to a peculiar encounter you experienced there. Mercyheart Town lies not far from Blissful Retreat, yet from the beginning Aunt Han had sealed the path between them, as though the land itself were under quiet interdict. The last time you tried to force your way through, you encountered a man named Yang Daomin pacing back and forth at the edge of the settlement. He told you that his family had been cast out by the town, made into targets of hatred, and that he had resolved to flee with his children to Heaven's Pier. Only after setting out did he realize that he had forgotten his clan's genealogy book, the sole record of their lineage. He dared not return for it. Black-clad figures lingered throughout the town, watchers in the shadows whom the locals called the Buddha Flower Emissary, and Yang feared that if he crossed their path again, neither he nor his children would leave alive. You retrieved the genealogy book on his behalf. As you turned its pages, you learned not only the history of the Yang clan, but also the past of Mercyheart Town itself, and of Mercyheart Monastery, now transformed into one of the Ori Pavilion's strongholds for human experimentation. Nearly 300 years ago, in 716 CE, during the height of the Tang dynasty, when Buddhism flourished across the realm, a monastery was commissioned in Qinghe. It was not yet called Mercyheart Monastery, but Fahua Monastery. In 718 CE, a renowned sculptor named Yang Zuanji arrived at Fahua Monastery with a dozen disciples in his train. They settled nearby, studying the Buddhist canon preserved within the monastery and honing their craft in the carving of sacred images. From them descended the 4 local clans of statue makers, and from their workshops arose the settlement once known as Shigongzhen, the town of stone carvers, now Mercyheart Town. Yet what concerned you was not this history, but what the town had become in recent years. Throughout the settlement, datura flowers bloomed in profusion. The townsfolk cut themselves to nourish the plants with their own blood, only to suffer grievously in return from the flowers' poison. Pathological symptoms became widespread as both body and mind were slowly corrupted. A local innkeeper confided that a few years earlier, when the Buddhist sculpture trade declined and the Buddha flower emissaries entered the region, the old livelihoods collapsed. With no other means of survival, Mercyheart's people turned to cultivating datura. Back then, your attention had been devoted to retrieving the genealogy book for Yang Daomin, so that he might begin a new life with his family at Heaven's Pier. In your haste, you gave little further thought to what you had learned of Mercyheart Town. Now, having uncovered the conspiracies of the Ori Pavilion, you are convinced that the town conceals matters you cannot afford to ignore. As you approach the edge of the settlement from the direction of Blissful Retreat, you happen upon a group of Buddha flower emissaries, agents of the Ori Pavilion beyond any doubt. You follow them into a cave, and there uncover a hidden prison where the townsfolk who refuse to plant datura are confined and beaten into submission. It becomes clear that cultivating poison flowers was not merely a choice made in reluctant desperation, but part of the Ori Pavilion's swindle, preying upon the helpless. After defeating the guards, you free the imprisoned townsfolk and agree to meet the survivors later at a hidden refuge known as the Rat Den. With little time to linger, you press on, stepping into Mercyheart Town in search of further signs yet to reveal themselves. What first draws your attention is a giant Buddha statue toppled onto the ruins of a dilapidated house. There, you recover a cursed doll and begin asking around for clues. An old woman named Yang Shan tells you that the Yang clan bears the weight of a sin, one tied to a man referred to as a Huai. You soon realize, by recalling what you learned from the Yang clan's genealogy book, that he is Yang Daohuai, the brother of Yang Daomin. 3 years ago, Yang Daohuai set out to search for Master Miaoshan in the Bodhi Sea, but none of his party ever returned after a catastrophe whose details remain unknown. In the aftermath, the Yang clan, especially Yang Daohuai's family, became the target of communal hatred. Enraged townsfolk pushed a Buddha statue onto Yang Daohuai's former home, marking it as cursed ground. It was this belief in sin, born of the decline of the Buddhist sculpture trade and deepened by the calamity at Bodhi Sea, that rendered not only the Yangs, but the other townsfolk vulnerable to the Ori Pavilion's rhetoric of redemption. promises of deliverance from sin and of the Buddha's divine favor through the planting of datura flowers. Yet when you speak with a child of the Yang clan, you notice something unusual. The cursed doll found next to the ruins of Yang Daohuai's home does not target the Yangs, but the other 3 clans who have persecuted them. The child remarks that the only person he has seen lingering near Yang Daohuai's crushed house is a Buddha flower emissary nearby. That night, you confront the man and show him the doll. He refuses to answer directly, but his open hostility toward the Zhou, Pan, and Z clans confirms your suspicion. He is no mere Ori Pavilion assassin. Who, then, is he? Moreover, what exactly happened in the Bodhi Sea when Yang Daohuai and his fellow townsfolk visited there 3 years ago? And what all of these have to do with Tian Ying, the Jianghu hero disguised as Master Miaoshan? The clue you need comes once again from a member of the Yang clan. A man named Yang Yixian tells you that his father, Yang Daosen, one of the finest stone carvers of his day, was hired by Master Miaoshan 3 years ago to carve something at Bodhi Sea. Yang Daosen never returned. He perished in the same catastrophe that claimed the lives of the townsfolk who journeyed to the region under the leadership of his brother, Yang Daohuai, and no payment was ever received by his family from Miaoshan. It seems increasingly clear that Master Miaoshan is tied to the catastrophe the townsfolk whisper about in hushed tones. To understand the full truth, you must travel to the place yourself. The first thing you notice as you descend toward the swamps of Bodhi Sea is not the fog lingering over the stretch of low ground, nearly hemmed in by surrounding cliffs, but the sound of drums, steady, intermittent, and unsettlingly regular. Drawn by the rhythm, you follow the echoes deeper into the swamps and fogs, until you reach the heart of Bodhi Sea, where the Pagoda of Sin stands within a small monastery. There, beside the pagoda, a man named Zhang Yinmang is striking a war drum. When you approach him, seeking to fathom the reason behind his actions, he offers no clear explanation. Instead, he repeats the same words with a fervour bordering on frenzy. If all the war drums across the region are beaten at the same time, the general will surely hear them, and under no circumstances must the sound of the other 3 drums be allowed to fall silent. Drawn by curiosity, you step beyond the monastery gate to aid him. Perhaps it is due to your unusual constitution, an aptitude Qi Sheng once alluded to, one that allows you to hear the rhythm of the world itself, that you are somehow able to locate the other war drums by their sounds alone, even though no one is striking them. Around each drum linger the remnants of soldiers belonging to a force known as the Tianhu army, their bodies and minds alike crushed beneath an unnamed sin. You can strike the drums only after defeating them, and each time you do, a fragment of memory reveals itself. Visions tied to the general of whom Zhang Yinmang so obsessively speaks. You rush back toward the monastery, hoping Zhang Yinmang might yet have more to reveal. But before you can reach him, you collapse suddenly before the Pagoda of Sin. As darkness closes in, a voice echoes through the pagoda's crumbling walls. Those are war drums of our reinforcements. The war drums sound. It is time to march north. When you awaken, it is within a dreamscape resembling an abandoned battlefield. Corpses lie heaped across the ground. The soil is buried beneath soot, all of it steeped in a deathly black. Bushes of fire burn in silence amid shattered ruins and ghastly mounds. Above, the sky is sealed beneath a smouldering veil of grey-blue, faintly illuminated by the embers of distant wars still raging beyond this forsaken place. From the phantoms you encountered along the way, you finally piece together the truth. The general they spoke of was Ye Wanshan, a warrior of the Northern Vow. He had once stood guard at Dingzhou against the Khitans and never yielded, even when the enemy paraded his own family before him, demanding that he open the city gates. Not even the deaths of his wife and 2 children could break his resolve. Yet his defiance, however steadfast, could not avert the fall of Dingzhou in 946 CE, only days before the death of General Wang Qing. What followed was a tortuous wait that stretched on for more than a decade, during which Ye Wanshan's long-yearned-for chance for vengeance never came. Convinced that the court would only resolve to march north and recover the lost Yanyan region when the Khitan threat grew imminent, Ye Wanshan and his army resorted to atrocity. Disguised as Khitans, they slaughtered the very town they had protected since the fall of Dingzhou. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Master Miaoshan commissioned the Pagoda of Sin, turning it into a prison for Ye Wanshan and his troops, in the hope that temporary confinement and ritual penance might redeem their sins and ready them once more for future campaigns. In 959 CE, following the death of Emperor Chai Rong, Miaoshan hired Yang Daoxin of Mercyheart Town to split a precious piece of jade into two, entrusting one half to Ye Wanshan for reasons that are not yet fully disclosed. But soon after Miaoshan, who was in fact Tian Ying, departed for Breeze Post on his mission, the war drums of Bodhi Sea were suddenly struck. Their sound drove Ye Wanshan and the remnants of his army into madness. They slaughtered the monks who remained at the monastery after Miaoshan's departure. It was at this very moment that Yang Daohuai and his fellow townsfolk arrived at the monastery in search of Miaoshan. This, then, is the true nature of the catastrophe whispered about in Mercyheart Town. It becomes clear that the apocalyptic dreamscape you entered after collapsing before the Pagoda of Sin belonged to Ye Wanshan himself, and that the being you confronted at the end of the blood-soaked trail was none other than the general's inner demon. It was the force that bound his consciousness to the moment he crossed the threshold from hero to monster, an incarnation of a nightmare he has never been able to relinquish. When you defeat it within the illusion, your awareness is wrenched back into the waking world. Before you can so much as rise, you see Ye Wanshan emerge from the Pagoda of Sin and disappear into the fog-shrouded depths of Bodhi Sea. Where he has gone, and what course he intends to pursue, you cannot tell. You can only hope that your encounter within the dreamscape has brought about the eventual defeat of the figure embodying his psychological burdens, and that his departure from Bodhi Sea is not merely physical, but also symbolic. The name of the place itself seems to invite such a reading. Bodhi signifies the breaking of doubt and the attainment of truth, while sea corresponds to the Chinese phrase Qinghe, literally, the sea of suffering, a Buddhist metaphor for the boundless troubles and afflictions of mortal existence. The place name evokes a tangible psychic battleground, a treacherous terrain that externalizes the struggle between obsession and release, and a toponym that gestures toward the search for inner truth as one drifts through the suffering sea of the Jianghu. A similar connotation can be read from Zhang Yinmang's name, the figure who strikes the drum before the player enters the dreamscape. While Jiang is a common surname, its verbal sense evokes display and the drawing of a bow, hinting at a latent, unusual power. Yin signifies concealment and withdrawal into shadow, while Mang denotes sharpness, keenness, and radiance. Taken together, the name situates the character in a phase of concealed potential, suggesting a narrative arc that moves from nascent brilliance through enforced restraint to eventual release, an arc that may refer to Jiang himself, to Ye Wanshan, or more ironically, to what both men ultimately fail to achieve. In the end, all that remains is a fragment of jade he left behind, one half of the instrument that Yang Daoxin had split in two at Tian Ying's request. You take it up in silence and then turn to search the monastery, hoping that among its remnants there may yet be objects capable of shedding light on what is still concealed. In the chamber adjacent to the war drum, you discover the ledger of Yang Daoxin. It records that Miaoshan had been officially recognized as an enlightened monk by the later Zhou court in the second year of Xiande, 955 CE. It also reveals that Yang Daoxin was killed by Ye Wanshan and his Tianhu army, alongside his brother Yang Daohuai, after arriving at the monastery to investigate the sound of the war drums. Upon returning to Mercyheart Town, you deliver the ledger to Yang Yixian, who bitterly remarks that he would certainly have confronted Miaoshan over the payment owed to his father, had Miaoshan truly succeeded in returning to Qinghe on the third appearance of the halo at Halo Peak, as everyone says, or more precisely, hopes. Shortly after speaking with Yang Yixian, you learn from another townsman that the Buddha flower emissary who once placed a cursed doll targeting the Zhou, Pan, and Z clans beside the ruins of Yang Dahuai's house has reportedly been seen wandering around Thousand Buddha Village on multiple occasions. When you arrive at Thousand Buddha Village, you find not the Buddha flower emissary you seek, but a monk called the Night Dream Monk, who explains that the land still bears the weight of the souls consumed by a fire that once swallowed the village whole. He then asks whether you will help him conduct a rite to guide these lingering spirits. After the preparatory rites are completed, the Night Dream Monk asks you to dream on behalf of the souls. You agree and soon fall asleep, waking only at midnight. Guided by the monk, you enter a procession of the dead, where you are charged with carrying a post lantern bearing the characters Shui Lu. Literally meaning water and dry land, Shui Lu refers by extension to the various realms or environments in which sentient beings dwell. This detail, together with the preparatory rites performed beforehand, indicates that the ritual in which you participate is a simplified Shui Lu Dharma assembly. The Shuilu Dharma Assembly is a soul deliverance rite within Sinicized Buddhism that synthesizes ancestral worship, indigenous beliefs concerning spirits and ghosts, Taoist fasting and offering practices, and Buddhist rites of deliverance. The origins of this ritual are recorded in orthodox lineage of the Buddhist community, a 13th century Buddhist historiographical text compiled by the Song dynasty monk Zhongjian. The relevant passage traces the ritual's inception to a dream of Emperor Wu of Liang, in which a divine monk appeared and addressed him. The beings of the 6 realms and the 4 modes of birth suffer immeasurably. Why not establish a great Shuilu fasting ritual to universally deliver all sentient spirits? Among all forms of merit, this is the foremost. When Emperor Wu consulted the monastic community, none could explain such a rite. Only Master Baoji urged the emperor to undertake a comprehensive search of scriptures and treatises, assuring him that textual precedents would surely exist. After closely examining the sutra on the Dharani for saving flaming mouth hungry ghosts and related materials, Emperor Wu formulated the ritual procedures and liturgical texts accordingly, completing the Shuilu rite after 3 years of compilation and refinement. That is to say, what you do in this eerie dream goes beyond merely leading the lost. It also frees the suffering dead from torment and transforms their fate, allowing them either to ascend to the heavens or to step into another life. The night dream monk clearly alludes to Emperor Wu of Liang's dream, suggesting that his request may be entangled with imperial authority, most likely that of Chai Rong's court. This reference implies that your dream and your encounter with the souls of those who perished in the past are not meant to function as a conventional ghost story, but rather as an episode that can be explained through a narrative thread centered on people who can hear the rhythm of the world and interact with spirits or phantoms from the past, a setting grounded in the game's relatively secular framework of extraordinary perception. In other words, this may suggest a parallel between the young master and figures such as Chai Rong, who appears to share a similar constitution, as evidenced by his ability to subdue local bandits and other threats through the resonant sound of the bell at Peace Bell Tower. Taken together with the fact that the Shuilu Dharma Assembly is a distinctly Sinicized Buddhist ritual, this Jianghu legacy once again returns to a recurrent theme: inheriting, reenacting, and reinterpreting the unfinished legacies of your predecessors within the Jianghu. Your effort to lay the souls to rest may be understood as a continuation of Tian Ying's earlier intervention in the wake of the catastrophe, even though neither of you can be described as a devoted Buddhist. The name Baoji, the figure who once urged Emperor Wu of Liang to seek out textual precedents for the Shuilu Dharma Assembly, may strike a familiar chord with you. The first Qinghe Dark Surge episode, Legend of Halo Peak, records that Tian Ying, while disguised as Miaoshen, declared himself a disciple of Master Baoji, a monk who had lived over 100 years earlier. The timing of this fragment, however, is historically inaccurate, perhaps the result of a localization inconsistency. Baoji lived between 418 and 514 CE, more than 4 centuries before the game's temporal setting. He was an active advisor to Emperor Wu of Liang in the Liang dynasty, 502 to 557, part of the southern and northern dynasties period, 420 to 589, the same era in which the lore surrounding Ba Wu in the Wraith Village and the Gleaming Abyss is situated. Baoji's prominence as a key advocate of the Shuilu Dharma Assembly rendered him emblematic of a particular religious persona, one who aids the deceased and the suffering in crossing over from states of liminality or karmic bondage toward more favorable rebirths or forms of liberation. Over time, popular belief came to associate Baoji with Guanyin, endowing him with a salvific divine status. Seen from this perspective, Tian Ying's decision to present Miaoshen as Baoji's disciple becomes easier to understand, for the Dharma name Miaoshen itself is also drawn from Guanyin, a figure that emerged in the Chinese religious imagination through the localization and transformation of the Indian bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Yet, Master Baoji's cultural significance extends well beyond that of a mere ritual mediator for the dead. According to the biographies of eminent monks compiled by Huijiao, Baoji is described as someone who had no fixed abode, ate irregularly, let his hair grow several inches long, and often wandered barefoot through streets and alleys. Such behavior, marked by a conspicuous disregard for monastic decorum and a seemingly erratic, even mad exterior, stands in deliberate contrast to the image of the disciplined bhiksu of Indian Buddhism. Instead, Baoji's conduct aligns more closely with indigenous Chinese traditions of reclusion, drawing upon established cultural archetypes such as the frenzied scholar. By aligning the figure of Miaoshan with the legacy of Baoji, Tian Ying situates his agenda within a tradition that embodies key principles of Buddhism's synicization, as well as the responsibility of negotiating social and religious tensions through both ritual and practical means. Like Baoji, Miaoshan does not consistently observe Buddhist doctrine. Nevertheless, his actions give concrete form to Buddhist ethical ideals. This parallel is reinforced by a note in the Palace of Annals, where Chai Rong commends Tian Ying's willingness to abandon his former identity and embrace a perilous path in pursuit of the greater good, regarding this choice as proof that he possesses the heart of a Buddha, despite his lack of faith in Buddhist teachings. As you press onward, you hear the voices of sorrow carried by the souls of villagers who perished in the fire that once swallowed the entire settlement. You encounter the phantoms of those they once loved, figures who also died in the catastrophe, yet may now be separated from them in the underworld, all condemned to wander the scorched earth as homeless spirits. At the site where a temple once stood, you witness scenes that lay bare the villagers' reckless devotion to Buddhism. Their religious fervour had reached such extremes that they resorted to acts of self-mutilation as expressions of reverence. At the end of the procession, the Night Dream monk explains that the fire which once claimed their lives was a fire from heaven, and that it continues to burn in the other world to this day. For those who perished remain blinded by obsession, and thus cannot enter the cycle of death and rebirth. Release, he says, can come only through facing the fire itself. As the monk disappears into the flames, you find both yourself and the villagers likewise surrounded by fire. With no choice but to proceed, you walk slowly across the burning field. The villagers follow behind you, fading one by one as you lead the way. The monk's words prove true. All karma arises from fire and must end with fire. At the end of the path, you are told that the souls of the dead have at last found peace. You awaken the next morning. As you begin to wonder whether what you witnessed was nothing more than a dream, two rustic monks tell you that they have been calling to you for some time and had nearly believed you dead. They also inform you that the village is shrouded in mist this morning, an unusual occurrence in a place where fog seldom forms, an omen that suggests the intervention of supernatural forces. From clues gathered during the dream and throughout the surrounding region, you come to understand that the Great Fire that claimed the villagers' lives occurred in 955 CE, the very year in which Emperor Chai Rong issued his pragmatically motivated anti-Buddhist edict, and Miaoshan was recognized as an enlightened monk. The villagers' souls have refused to find rest not as a result of divine punishment, but because they remain bound by grief, the trauma of their violent deaths, which occurred despite their devotion to the Buddha, and the anguish of separation from their loved ones. The so-called heavenly fire was likely the result of a meteor strike rather than a purposeful design, as parts of the village resemble an impact crater and fragments of the meteor remain scattered throughout the area. This settings appears to draw on a historical, though more plausibly legendary, account of a meteor falling during Chai Rong's anti-Buddhist campaigns. The Night Dream monks remark that the villagers' souls remain bound to this place because they refuse to see clearly, indicates that the heavenly fire also functions as a symbolic reference to Yehuo, or karmic fire. Ye, or karma, denotes the latent force generated by all actions, which matures into retributive consequences within the causal order. Fire, in Buddhist thought, commonly symbolizes burning pain and destructive suffering. Karmic fire thus names the searing anguish produced by negative karma. It encompasses both the fiery punishments of the hell realms and, more broadly, the inner torment through which ignorance, avidya, and malicious intent scorch the mind in the present world. Crucially, karmic fire is not a form of divine punishment, but the natural fruition of karmic forces as conditions ripen. Although it signifies suffering, Buddhism maintains that such pain can be transformed through cultivation. Chan Buddhism, taking figures such as Baoji as pioneering exemplars, even speaks of karmic fire as the site of awakening, suggesting that liberation from suffering requires confronting rather than evading the very causes that give rise to it. By leading the trapped souls into the fire that continues to blaze amid their unresting deaths, you guide them toward the painful realization that their suffering arises not only from the catastrophe itself, but also from their obsessive reliance on the Buddha's supernatural power, thereby setting them upon the path of rebirth. What complicates this account, however, is the Dark Surge fragment you obtain upon completing this Jianghu legacy. Combining this account and other information gathered from documents such as Hui Yao's journal, you are able to piece together Tian Ying's part in this tragic story. To facilitate Chai Rong's anti-Buddhism edicts, Tian Ying was to disguise as Master Miaoshan, so that he could effectively persuade the locals to follow the emperor's policies. Since 954 CE, Miaoshan began to teach Buddhist doctrines in Fahua Monastery, now known as Mercyheart Monastery, and, by means of some instrument, created a halo around the top of the pagoda at Halo Peak. This is the event later referred to as the first miracle by Qinghe locals, like Yang Yixian, the son of Yang Daoxin in Mercyheart Town. In 955, the year in which Chai Rong promulgated his policies regulating Buddhist practice, Miaoshan travelled to Thousand Buddha village. There, he discovered that the villagers were engaged in a custom of cutting off their fingers as sacrificial offerings before Buddhist statues. Seeking to restrain such cruelty, he began lecturing Buddhist doctrines at the edge of the village. Most villagers, however, dismissed him as a heretic. Only a small number were persuaded. At dawn, as those few followers departed with him and made their way halfway along the mountain trail, a meteor struck the village, igniting a fire that consumed the lives of those who had remained behind. Seeing the disaster unfold, Tian Ying immediately sat down to chant scriptures of deliverance for the dead. At the same time, he recognized that this moment of catastrophic spectacle could serve as an opportunity to consolidate and extend his authority as an enlightened monk, thereby advancing Chai Rong's broader political enterprise. Continuing his lectures on Buddhist doctrine, he once again activated the instrument atop Halo Peak, recreating the radiant halo around the pagoda spire. This event would come to be remembered as the second miracle of Master Miaoshan in Qinghe, a vision that conferred the name Halo Peak upon the site. The later Zhou court later erected a stone stele amid the ruins of Thousand Buddha village to reinforce the narrative that the village's tragic fate stemmed from religious excess and that the meteor signified divine punishment, an interpretation that served to legitimize the court's anti-Buddhist edict. While such a narrative fails to do justice to the villagers, Chai Rong's measures must nevertheless be situated within the practical constraints of that specific historical conjuncture. From the late Tang through the Five Dynasties period, Buddhist monasteries, long exempt from taxation and corvée labour, accumulated extensive landholdings through donations, imperial patronage, and annexation, forming semi-autonomous estate economies that substantially eroded the state's fiscal base. At the same time, commoners increasingly sought refuge from warfare and taxation by entering the monastic order or attaching themselves to temples as dependent households, sharply reducing the population available for taxation and military service, while exacerbating relations of personal subjugation and the consolidation of landholdings. These pressures were further compounded by a post-war shortage of copper, as the monastic casting of statues and ritual implements consumed large quantities of metal, aggravating currency scarcity and hindering economic recovery. Moreover, as also reflected in the game's representation, the walls, buildings, and stored grain of monasteries made them natural refuges for displaced populations, bandits, fugitives, and at times armed groups, while their locations and partial judicial immunity rendered them effective shelters beyond the reach of local authorities. The former glory of Buddhism had already dissipated, and it had increasingly become a veil for popular superstition and illicit practices. In this context, Chai Rong launched his so-called anti-Buddhist edict as an effort to reassert administrative authority and recover material capacity by dismantling semi-autonomous monastic structures. The label anti-Buddhism may suggest an attempt to eradicate Buddhist belief itself, yet historical scholarship has demonstrated that this characterization is misleading, a point we have already touched upon in a previous video. In the game's lore, when Chai Rong begins melting Buddhist statues to mint much-needed coinage in 955, Tian Ying appears as Master Miaoshan to preside over a 7-day period of ritual fasting, at the conclusion of which a coin was engineered to fall from a statue's hand, thereby legitimizing the act. Historically, Chai Rong justified the melting of statues by invoking Buddhist rhetoric itself, declaring, "I have heard the Buddha teach that bodily existence in this world is a delusion, whereas benefiting others is of paramount importance. If even the Buddha's true body, were it still present, would willingly be cut away for the good of the world, how could these copper images be worth begrudging?" Although such a statement may appear sacrilegious, Chai Rong was not proposing a novel doctrine so much as borrowing a familiar Buddhist trope and redeploying it within a secular political framework. Acts of bodily sacrifice undertaken for the sake of altruism or the Buddha are common across Buddhist narrative traditions. the Buddha offering his body to feed a starving tigress or cutting away his flesh to sustain an eagle, the medicine king Bodhisattva immolating his body as an offering, and Princess Miaoshan, the mortal incarnation of Guanyin, severing her arms to save her father. A further rationale for Chai Rong's policies that compel religious reverence to yield to pragmatic governance, can be found in Confucian political thought. The historiographical text Zhuozhuan famously states, "When the state prospers, rulers heed the people. When it declines, they rely on the gods." While Buddhism undoubtedly constitutes an important current within Chinese cultural life, it never attained a position of uncontested hegemony comparable to that of Christianity in the West. Even during periods of Buddhist expansion in China, its practices and doctrines were consistently subject to close scrutiny and sustained criticism. The Tang dynasty essayist and statesman Han Yu, for example, argued against Buddhist devotion in his 819 CE memorial on the Buddha's relic, contending that the veneration of osseous remains attributed to eminent Buddhist figures amounted to little more than idolatry directed at ordinary bleached bones. Returning to the fate of the villagers who died in the meteor strike and the subsequent fire, you are struck by how difficult it is to articulate an adequate emotional response to the tragedy. The villagers' mode of Buddhist devotion was not without problems, and their actions may indeed have exacerbated existing socio-economic tensions. Yet blaming ordinary people for turning to religious fervour amid chaos and disaster offers no real solution either. By contrast, figures such as Chai Rong and Tian Ying, along with others in positions of power, may appear cold-hearted in their willingness to seize upon the catastrophe's tragic contingency as an opportunity to advance policy objectives. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that their initiatives ultimately proved effective in addressing the social and economic strains of the period. You find yourself returning once again to the Night Dream monk's words that perhaps you are the most fitting candidate for his charge, precisely because you are neither bound by superstition nor consumed by fevered devotion. The tragedies of the past remain beyond repair. Nothing can be undone. Yet kindness and sympathy still endure as gestures of meaning. Through them, you may offer a measure of solace to the perished souls, guiding them away from the karmic fire that continues to smoulder in the other world. Yet such misfortune shows no sign of ending, so long as the world you walk remains steeped in chaos. Amid the soot and shattered idols of Thousand Buddha Village, you uncover a half-burned letter. It is written by one who calls himself Alai, sworn in ink and ash to exact vengeance upon every soul in Mercyheart Town who persecuted his family after the death of his father, Yang Daohuai. You carry this letter back to Granny Yangshan in Mercyheart Town. Her reply only deepens the mystery. The handwriting, she insists, is unmistakably that of her nephew, Yang Daohuai's son, who was also said to have perished after his father's death in the Bodhi Sea. At that moment, your thoughts return to the cursed doll found amid the ruins of Yang Daohuai's former home, and to the Buddha flower emissary who had left it behind. When you show him the charred remains of the letter, his reaction betrays the truth. He is indeed its author. Since Chai Rong's anti-Buddhist edict, Mercyheart Town's livelihood, once built upon the carving and trade of Buddhist statues, had entered a relentless decline. The townsfolk initially believed they would be spared the worst of its consequences, shielded by their long-standing ties to Fahua Monastery and its abbot, Master Miaoshan. They were wrong. By 959, the strain had become unbearable. Desperate for answers, Yang Daohuai of the Yang clan gathered a group of villagers and travelled to the Bodhi Sea to seek out Master Miaoshan, demanding to know why they were made to suffer, despite having committed no wrongs, unaware that Miaoshan was no longer there to answer. After the slaughter at the Bodhi Sea, the victims' families searched for a place upon which to lay their grief and blame. The emperor was untouchable. General Ye Wanshan and the circumstances of his actions lay far beyond their knowledge and any possibility of reprisal. Master Miaoshan, too, had slipped beyond the reach of the living. In the end, all blame settled upon Yang Daohuai's name. His son, Alai, likely named Yang Yilai, endured the townsfolk's persecution and feigned his own death. Driven by his thirst for vengeance, he turned to the Ori Pavilion, drawn to it by the knowledge that it profited from the villagers' suffering. Realizing there is no hope of persuading him, you withdraw and turn instead to seek out the rat den, the hidden refuge of villagers who refuse to submit to the Ori Pavilion's order. Outside a house, you come upon a boy lying unconscious. When you rouse him, he explains that he fell from the rooftop while attempting to capture one of the oddities. You retrieve what he sought on his behalf. Sensing no malice in you, he tells you that he is among those who now dwell in the rat den and offers to guide you there himself. Descending into the cavern known as the rat den, you learn from him, and from the others, that the boy is known as Pip Rat. He has lived there for some time, and has since joined a small rebel band known as the Five Rats, who wage a quiet war against the Buddha flower emissaries. Pip Rat's mother was once a disciple of the Silver Needle, and before her death, she succeeded in devising an antidote capable of curing the afflictions caused by datura poison. Since then, Pip Rat has spent most of his days beside the medicinal furnace she left behind, trying to replicate her prescription. His efforts were long dismissed as futile, for the antidote required oddities, visible and capturable only to those with rare constitutions like your own, attuned to the rhythm of the world. Yet with your help, doubt finally gives way to possibility. After gathering several varieties of oddities together, the two of you at last succeed in refining the antidote he has sought for so long. You bid him farewell. A few days later, when you return to the rat den, you are told that Pip Rat has been missing shortly after your departure. Following the faint scent of antidote residue still lingering near the medicinal furnace, you are led to a large building in Mercyheart Town, now occupied by the Buddha flower emissaries. At the foot of its stairs lies a discarded package of antidote. From within the building, you overhear that Pip Rat has already fallen into the hands of the villains, betrayed by a townsman enslaved by his addiction to datura powder. You burst inside, cutting down the few guards stationed in the chamber, and seize the addict. He falls to his knees, begging for his life, offering to lead you to the place where Pip Rat is being held in exchange for mercy. Yet once there, he turns on you, only to find that he has gravely misjudged your strength. Moments later, he lies defeated among the fallen emissaries. At that moment, the rest of the Five Rats arrive. Only then do you learn the full story. The addict who betrayed both you and Pip Rat is, in fact, the boy's own father. Seduced by the Ori Pavilion's promise that cultivating datura would earn the Buddha's blessing, he fell into addiction, swallowed by the very poison he was meant to tend. What remained of him slowly unravelled. The man who had once been a husband and a father was reduced to something twisted and shameful. He first turned against his wife, the Silver Needle disciple who had sought to save the town from poison and dependency, by disclosing her location and, in effect, selling her life to the Ori Pavilion in exchange for datura powder. He later repeated the same betrayal against his own son. When Pip Rat risked his life to bring him the antidote he had finally managed to brew with your help, he returned with treachery. You wrenched the boy from the cage, but your arrival comes too late. In the days before you reached him, Pip Rat revealed nothing of the rat den. Broken by the injuries of relentless interrogation, he dies moments later. Your heart has always burned with the desire to become a Jianghu hero, one who strikes down the powerful and stands for the poor. Yet for a fleeting moment, you come to understand that even a Jianghu hero cannot right every wrong he encounters. You recall a note Jiang Wulang once left for you in the guidebook he entrusted to your keeping. He, himself a martial prodigy who had already made his name by the age of 19, confessed that he too once believed every injustice could be answered by the sword. But in time, he learned that there would always be lives he could not save, and pasts beyond redemption. You sigh, refusing to let doubt or hesitation take root and turn your focus back to the mysteries before you. Where is the other half of the jade left behind by Ye Wanshan, and what is its true purpose? Would the third miracle still come to pass if Tian Ying has already returned to Qinghe? Your next destination is clear: the Palace of Annals, once occupied by the Hanging Blade, the very order to which Tian Ying and Chai Rong belong.